Okay, so our beginner genealogy, what we're going to be covering today for our brief layout is how to find Ancestry through the Framingham Public Library website. A lot of other libraries also has this as an online resource. We're going to cover the basic layout of how to use Ancestry, and then the basics of building your family tree, how to search for people, the difference between records and categories on Ancestry. And then we're going to cover a few fun things like spell checking, name changes, and how to get certificates. And lastly, we are going to cover how to save information from the library when you use it. Typically in pre-pandemic times, we have Ancestry through our resources, and they only allow you access through the library. So you have to be at the library to use them and then save the information. They have extended that until December of this year, and they may renew it. So you guys can use it through home. You just need to use your library card number and enter it in, and then you'll have access. So finding Ancestry through our website. So I'm just going to leave the presentation and show you guys through here. So this is our lovely website. And when you go under Find Online here at the top, you'll go under Research Resources, under Articles and Databases A to Z. Luckily, Ancestry is at the top. So scroll down a little and you'll just click on this main part right here. And so before you begin, one of the main things that I do want to cover before you jump right into building your family tree is it's always good to set some goals of what you want to accomplish. Some people will just go, oh, I want to research every single person, see how far back I can go. But I would like, if you guys want to share in the chat box some of the goals you do have, maybe it's, I want to learn more about my maternal side of the family. Or maybe your family came from another country and you want to learn more about the people who are from there. Or maybe you do just want to see how far back you can go. I know someone who's gone back to 1640 on their family tree. Another question is, do you plan on creating a digital tree? One important thing is, if you do have Ancestry as your own account, when you do research through the library, you can just save it right through there and log in, which is really nice. There's other places like MyHeritage that you can also build your family tree at. And they're all great because otherwise you're going to get a lot of paperwork. So keep that in mind. And we do have a lot of our handouts. They will be included, they got included in our email that we sent out, and we'll send you the PDF of this presentation as well, along with the handouts again, just so you guys have that. They're great ways to keep track of all the notes that you're going to be taking. So the research logs are included in the email that we sent you. And another important thing is, are other family members helping you? So a lot of people will dive into this not realizing that maybe your cousin or your aunt has already started your family research. And that's a great way for you to already have a foundation. So if you're close with any of your family, feel free to ask them. And then it's a great way to already get started. You don't want to repeat the exact same information in the process that they've already done. It'll save you a lot of time because you'll find this is time consuming, but it's in a fun way. And then the last thing is, are you emotionally ready to do the research on your family tree? I know a lot of you probably have heard in the past years with the DNA kits, people finding out maybe that's not your parent, maybe that's not your sibling. There's some drama revolves around it, and some of the things that you uncover are not going to be exciting things. I know people who have found out they're related to horrible people, or maybe their ancestor did something bad, and you never know what you're going to get from your family tree. So always keep that in mind. Are you willing to uncover things that may not be too pleasant, instead of just your sweet old great-great-grandmother who came over from another country? So one of the things is, what do you know? And this is a good way to start. You want to start with yourself, and then you're going to build off. If you have siblings, hopefully, your parents, you usually know those birth dates where people are born. And that's a great way to start looking for certain certificates, which gives you names of, your grandparents, great-grandparents, siblings. And it's a great way to start expanding. And then what you want to do is branch out to immediate family, and from immediate family to extended families. So, say if you have an aunt that I mentioned that maybe she's doing research too, find out what she knows. Maybe you have a grandfather that went to another country and got certificates himself. So you just want to see what they have already done and find out what they know. Another is rumors and passed down stories and facts. You may have, for example, I actually have a family member who swears we're from Swedish royalty. We're not. I've done the research, but that's a rumor that has been passed down in our family for years, and I was able to disprove it. But you never know where this could take you, because maybe you heard you guys are from Australia and then you never found out anything about it. And then through this research, you do find you guys did come from Australia. So it's always worth writing down what people know, whether they're facts or rumors. Another thing is I want you guys to look for documents and other forms of media that you have. Photos are a great way. They have writings on the back of specific names. Maybe it has who they married or who's in the photo or the address of where they lived. Another thing is family Bibles. That's very big, especially in religious families. Oftentimes you'll see at the beginning of the Bible, you'll have the list of descendants or who they married or birthdays, and they just write everything in it. Some family Bibles actually have pages where you can do all the marriages and all the children born, and it's kind of a nice thing to look for. Family reunions are great as well. I know everyone's probably eager after this past year to go out and celebrate and see family members. Family reunions is a great way to do that, and it's a great way for you to ask everyone, what do they know, or do they want to help you build your family tree? And the last thing for building your family tree before we jump back to Ancestry is the living versus the deceased. You get more information from the living, so start with the people who are alive now to build your tree, and then go on to those who are deceased. Most, when you guys jump into genealogy, everyone thinks, oh, I can't wait to find that ancestor from hundreds of years ago or from another country. But start with the living, because that information is limited, and one day you won't have that, and then it'll be deceased information. So one of the people I will be using as an example a lot is in this photo right here, Honora Rook. She is my great-great-grandmother. So we are going to head back to Ancestry. All right, so this is the homepage of Ancestry. This is pretty much a very organized layout. So before you click on the begin searching, there are below, you'll see search for census, vitals, which usually are, deaths, marriages, and births, military, search immigration, and you'll notice at the top, this is the home page. There's a search bar, which also, when you click on begin searching, takes you to the same part. Message boards are more of if you'd like to pose a question, or if someone's researching similar things, you can talk to other people. It's always great to find a community of those who also have passion for studying and looking up genealogy. The Learning Center is more resources that you might need and come across. Those are great when you're stuck. The charts and forms, they're kind of like the handouts that we had emailed you guys. They'll have breakdowns of if you're writing everything by hand, be careful of your spelling if you're writing by hand. And then you'll be able to print out those, or they'll have PDFs that you can edit. Start searching. So one of the ways that I recommend starting is just the basic search box. If you know more information, such as you want like a birth, a marriage, or a death, if you click on that, you'll enter it in. One thing to keep in mind is when you search, so we'll type in if I can remember correctly. So we will just take the search just so you can see. You'll notice on the side, it'll say search filters. One thing to keep in mind is you'll notice it says broad or exact. These are very finicky, I will say. So one of the things I will get to later are spelling errors. Sometimes something will be spelled wrong, or there'll be different types of ways that the person has spelled it throughout the years. So if you hit exact on everything, chances are you might not get the most information. Got a 1 right there. And then what you'll be able to do is they have all these, and yes, it's Irish, but you'll be able to click by country. So say if you're researching someone that you know for a fact was born in America and married in America and died in America, then you definitely want to click on North America. And it's great that it breaks it down by country. It also breaks it down by record year. This helps you just narrow it down. The categories on the left are good for when you know exactly what you want. Most people, I recommend starting, if you can find the birth, it's a great way to go through the person's life from when they were born through whether they had kids or got married and where they lived, and then to death. It's a great, it's a nice arc for the person. It's like you're getting their whole life instead of in bits and pieces along the way. And then one of the things is the records versus categories. So when we go back up to the top, right now we're in records. It'll be right here on the top right. These break it down. You'll see birth and baptism all the way down to passenger list and then death and burial. When you click on them, before you click on them, you'll see it has, the general layout. It'll say name, birth, baptism. Sometimes they'll have the image preview. When you click on categories, it does not give you that preview. I always prefer to use records. I think it will help you guys, especially if you're just beginning for your research. And it'll break it down even more. So for example, I know for a fact this person had never been to California, and it's 100% fact. So I know that's definitely not going to be this person. If you happen to know some of these facts, and once again, ask those that are living now what they know, and it will definitely help you narrow it down when it comes to these things. Also, she never served in the military. Another thing to keep in mind, not a lot of women did, or if they were nurses. But you also have to think of what historical event was happening around that person's life, and then you can narrow it down further. Another thing is you can look at the census copy, which we have a photo of later. What you can do is hover over the field, and then it will tell you exactly, let me go back to, we'll just click on this one so you can see. When you view the record and it has the image attached, so this one is typed, which is really nice, but you'll notice when I hover over it, it actually will type it out. It's fantastic for those in other languages and for cursive. I'll be honest, I'm not of the cursive generation. I cannot read it that well. And then on the side, you'll notice these little extras, and what they can do is you can print, download the image, rotate it. There's more settings, zoom in and out to get the whole document. So keep these in mind, and if you do print them, I recommend being able to print this bottom part. If you look down here on the bottom, on the far right, you'll see it has two little images of an outline. It will tell you exactly the lines typed out. This is great when the handwriting is not the best, or sometimes the ink has smeared when the person who was writing it down, smudged their hand. So make sure when you guys print or download, do the same thing with this information below for the person that you want. So this is a copy of the census. Most people are probably familiar with this. You probably have taken a census sometime in your life. Now it's digitized, which is always a nice thing for us to fill out. It generally looks the same for every country. You have the categories at top that say the locations, the names, occupations, who lives in the household, and it has all the same information because a lot of countries do want that. And it's important to keep in mind if you're going to other countries, say Sweden will be in Swedish, if you go to Germany, German. So you keep that in mind as you look these up. One of the things, sorry about the formatting, apparently PowerPoint changes to Google Slide, but these are some common abbreviations that you guys will probably need throughout it. A lot of you are probably familiar with it, DOB, date of birth, or DOD, date of death, and then some of them are not as common. You'll notice that in other languages, they may have different abbreviations. We don't have a copy of those abbreviations, but like I said, when you hover over it, it will translate for you. And as long as you have your computer set to English. So what's in a name? So names are one of my favorite things to research when it comes to genealogy. And last names are historically named after a person the person knows, or it's been influenced by one of these groups. If you guys would like, in the chat box, I would love to know if you happen to know what your name means, or if you have a family name that means something. I know my middle name is named after every woman in every generation has the name Nora. I'm the one in my generation. I'm sure the next will have Nora as well. But feel free to share if you know what your name means. I have included links at the end if you would like to find out what your name means. But usually they're historically influenced by one of four groups. Usually our society is very much through the father. You usually get your father's name, last name, he's gotten it from his father's last name, and so on and so forth. This is meant to stereotypically because the father is the one who, it's his child, as long as he's identified that throughout history, that's my son, that's my daughter. That's common. So, and the locative is geographical. So some of the things you'll hear is like, for example, de la Mancha. It means of the middle, and it usually is in Spain. So it's one of the regions in Spain. And then you can kind of deduce, oh, that's where they're from. And the second is occupational and status, baker, blacksmith. I'm sure you guys have heard last names like that. And nicknames, which are help to describe a person. You'll hear, little, stout. Sometimes the nicknamed ones aren't the most flattering, but last names are always a very interesting research. I know someone whose last name was Dove because the parents were hippies and they changed it because they thought it sounded more 60s. Needless to say, he changed it when he got married, and he took his wife's name. So one of the things also to keep in mind is, especially nowadays, names are changing, especially with women. Women are choosing more to keep their own last name, or they're hyphenating their name when they get married. And a lot of children, whether it's through second or third marriage, or if they can't decide, which last name to choose of the parents, sometimes they'll hyphenate it. Hyphenated ones are kind of good because then you know what the maiden name and the father's name usually are in a marriage. The other thing, our last names could also have been made up, changed completely, or spelled differently. I did give you the example of the last name Dove, just because they were feeling very into the 60s, but also as different pronunciations through different languages. The need to hide their national origin for discrimination issues. So, for example, say if someone's name, say if you were in World War II and you go, wow, my last name sounds too Jewish. There were people who actually changed their last name because they wanted to blend in as much as possible. And it's kind of unfortunate because I think last names are fantastic and they have so much meaning. So it is important to keep in mind if your family went through some hardship in a historical event, or they were in a different country that had a historical event that happened in it, that could have affected their last name. Also, or first name too. Also changing the spelling to conform in the same way. Sometimes you'll hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, but my English name is this. That's one thing to keep in mind as well. And I know spelling changes. My dad changed part of his last name because he hated how it was spelt. So it's Bert, but it used to be Bertle, and he hated it with a passion. So he just changed it slightly. And then the other thing is changing the name with immigration. When a lot of people had come over, especially to America, they would change it to sound like they fit in more. And I have a few examples here on the bottom. You'll have, Schmidt, maybe they drop the T, or maybe they leave the T. Johannesson becomes Johnson. A lot of those ones you'll hear. Johannesson is also, you'll see how it says SSON. That is stereotypical of a lot of countries that are Scandinavian. I know my family's last name, we had Olafsson because it was son of Olaf, and we had Ola's daughter, Dotter. And then eventually the guy goes, nope, I'm changing it. And he actually picked a geographical name to change it to when he immigrated to America. So family names change through immigration or marriage. Those are the most popular ones. Nicknames and middle names used as first names are also something to keep in mind. I know a lot of people know someone with a nickname. I go by a nickname with Jill, but you have these stories where I know someone who for years, they thought their grandfather was named Sonny. That was not his name, but he hated his name so much. He refused to be called it. On every photo, it said Sonny. On every document, it said Sonny, except for his birth, marriage, and death. Those were the only times. Even, I don't know how they did this, but even on the birth certificate, they said his name was Sonny. So you never know how far people will go for that. Another is transcription errors in the census. It's possible that the person who was writing down all these names, they would hear, especially with a foreign accent, they would go, I don't even know what they're saying. I think it's spelled this way. Or maybe the person didn't know English, and when they translate it, they just did the best they could and stuck with it. So we're going to be moving on to finding certificates. So one of the important things is ask your family members first. Can't stress this enough. Ask the living first. The other is using census records to find a year. If you can look under, so we'll head back to Ancestry. if you look under the census records of, just a moment. We'll go back to search. So we'll go census and voter list. Another thing to keep in mind is if the person you're researching was married or not, especially if it was a female, the name could have changed on the census list. They often do them, time years apart. And it's another thing to keep in mind. Other countries have taken census lists at different time periods. So maybe we have, a 2021 here, but maybe they didn't take that in another country. So I always like to add in a spouse if possible. And it helps, I find, if you put the maiden name up above for women and then the spouse with his married last name. So we will use this one as our thing. So you'll notice here the exact information that I want. As I said, you can hover over and it will tell you what it is. Or it'll tell you right here, everything you need to know that's in this document, but on one convenient page, which is really nice. So as you go through this person, you'll notice all of this. For example, this is not my ancestor, but it is a great way to see, their relation to the head of the house, if they're married or single, and it also will include the mother's and father's birthplaces, and if they're able to speak English. That's a good thing to look for if they do speak English, because that might also affect if you notice there were errors in how the names are spelt. It's possible maybe through immigration they didn't have it translated correctly. And then I always like how it says able to read or write. We take that for granted nowadays because everyone seems to, have an education where they can read and write, even at the bare minimum. The further back you go, the more you'll see, no, they cannot read or write. So the other thing is searching vitals on Ancestry. As I mentioned, vitals tend to be birth, marriage, and death certificates. You'll find they have vital records per state. I did include the link later on to Massachusetts. Figured most of you are probably from Massachusetts or living here now. As you search vitals, it's always important to check off which ones you're looking for. It helps narrow it down. If you can narrow it down as much as possible, that's what you would like to, look for. So birth certificates, most states didn't require them until the earliest 20th century. It might be a little tricky finding some the further back you go, but a lot of places still kept them, whether unofficial or not. If you're still not finding them, remember how I talked about the name changes, transcription errors, and also you might be looking in the wrong location. So you might go, oh, I know my great-grandfather was born in Massachusetts. He was born in Boston. It's possible he wasn't. For one example I found is that during my own research is I had a great-grandfather. Everyone said he, born in Sweden, looked up, turns out his parents were born there and his siblings were born there. His mother was 9 months pregnant when they moved over and she gave birth 2 weeks later. He was not born in Sweden, but the whole family was. So everyone just assumed, oh yeah, they're all from Sweden. They all came over. Just because they all came over doesn't mean they were all born there. And it's possible they came over from another country, but they were from a different country first before they moved over. Just, convenience of trying to get passage over. So if you're searching the wrong location, always figure out where maybe they immigrated sooner, maybe they did later. And it's also possible the records just don't exist. And that's something no one who's doing genealogy wants to hear. It does not exist, but that's the sad truth. And a little research tip is that in America, we do the month, day, year. Some other countries will do day, month, year, which that will definitely confuse you. I know it confuses me now, so something to keep in mind. So with marriage certificates, it's easier if you know the maiden name and the residence at time of marriage. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. But like I said, if you look up census records, it's a great way to start with that. Also, check out your local churches. So you can go to almost any church that's been around for a while, and they usually keep copies or a running list of every marriage that they've performed there. And that's really a kind of a sweet thing, a nice thing. And some of them will also have original licenses. So my thesis project, I actually worked with a 200-year-old church on the North Shore who had flooding problems in their basement. They had not been down there in decades, and they discovered they had 200 years worth of church history down there, including all these records of marriages, donations, deaths, every single thing that had ever been performed or done. They had been keeping records. So we were able to turn that into like a museum quality genealogy research area for them and for the local community. So death certificates. Fun fact, the earliest state to start death registration is Massachusetts itself. So that's only 1841. When you think about how long ago it was, it doesn't seem like that much. Each state kind of has their own thing. So say if you're looking for Nevada, I would definitely recommend find out when that state became an official state and when they started to officially record birth and death certificates, because all the states are different. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of death certificates will edit information out. They'll redact, for example, in Colorado, Idaho, and Nevada, they will not show how long, how the person died on the application. Some people will call it qualified applicants, and you have to be within a certain degree removed from the person. So say if they go, you have to be within 3 generations. It's unfortunate if you're looking for a great, 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 great grandfather, you might not be able to get that. Some of the certificates are free, which is great. Some of them you do have to pay for. So please keep that in mind if you want the official records. Another thing, and when you go for looking in other countries, it may be more difficult finding those certificates because oftentimes they will say you need to be a resident or a citizen of that country in order to get those. Unless if you are within, certain generations. I happen to have a grandmother who had gone to Ireland, and she was born there and then immediately moved over here and then moved back and then moved back again. But when she visited, she was able to get as many certificates as she could find. And now I have them all. So it's fantastic for me that she was able to do that because I would not have been able to myself. As you go through, you'll notice on Ancestry, I did talk about those message boards. It's possible you might find someone that you are related to who's also doing the same genealogy, and they might be from another country. It doesn't hurt to ask them and say, hey, you have access to this for free. Do you think you could send me a copy of it? Most times you'll find that they're excited that you asked and to share their information. So the health departments and the vital records in each county where the death occurred. You may not know the county name, you might just know the state, but at least start at the state level and then work your way back to being narrowed. And one more thing with the death certificates is errors in grief. When a person is filling out the death certificate, oftentimes they are tragically upset about the passing of a loved one. And you need to keep that in mind. I always like to say, take it with a tiny grain of salt. It's true because, it is, verified and all this, but there are things that have been wrong. When my grandmother passed away, my dad did his certificate for her. We reviewed it, thank God we did, and we found 5 errors. My dad was so distraught about losing his mother. He didn't even notice that he had her birth city wrong, her birth date wrong. And I mean, he's not dyslexic, but he mixed up so many numbers, and they were just the little things. You wouldn't even have noticed it if you didn't know her exact information. And if he had passed that saying, yep, it looks great, he never would have noticed that everything was wrong. So this is one example of the marriage registry in the town of Beverly. And what it has at the top is date and place of marriage, the records, the names. Some interesting things you'll find, which do not seem appropriate nowadays, as you'll also see, the color of the bride and groom. You'll also see things like what number of marriage was it? Was it their 4th marriage, their 1st marriage? And what's also great is it will include the officiant name and their residence. So oftentimes you'll be able to say, oh, you know what? They actually were the minister or the reverend at this church at this time period. And then most likely they got married there. So it's always wonderful to see these kinds of things. And you get a lot of information because you get the name of the parents, and then you also get the maiden names and where they lived. All right, so we're going to try and find on here one of the marriage certificates. One of the main things that you'll notice is that as you go through and you find these documents, you want to make sure, because people had done the research for this, they've scanned these documents, they've translated it, which thankfully, they have done this. And sometimes the images will be cropped, or say if you're connecting to someone's tree and they uploaded an image, you want to make sure that it has, and if granted, you can't feel the raised seal that will be on these certificates on most of them, but you want to be able to look for an official marking or seal to show that, yes, this is a legit thing. Not that, you know, people will put random documents that are, you know, fake on here. We like to think the best of people. But you do want to look for that, because if you were able to show people and say, you know, look, I found this, you want to say this is the actual legit document that was used. Genealogy is all about finding the sources and the citations, and it's also a good thing to keep track of where you found a document. So we are going to look at marriages. Let's see if this one. So quite a few of them you'll see similar to our previous list, that they were just lists of these, which is unfortunate, but you do get some of the original handwriting. More of the modern certificates you'll see have the actual seal on it. Let's see if I can bring up a different record. No, so this is the one that I showed you guys, the one Beverly. All right. Something I'm going to be able to bring up an example of that today. No, but one of the things I did want to mention while you're on here, no matter what document you click on, even if it doesn't have the image, it will have this information down here. When you go to the bottom, it'll say source citation. If you happen to have a paid subscription that you use for your family tree, you want to make sure that you copy this information, or at the very least in one of the handouts that we emailed you guys, you want to write down this information so you have the source. So if you cannot save the document for any reason, you know exactly where you can find it again. But as I mentioned, you can use the Ancestry through the library website using your library card number until December of this year, and then by then we'll have an update on if you'll be able to still use it remotely from home or your phone instead of using an actual computer that's sitting at the library. So from working from home, or from anywhere, it's great because you can save the information much easier. But we do recommend clicking either on the save button in the top corner. You can only really do that when you have the access through the library. So if we go back to, you have to be at the library and you're doing this from home, you'll have to take a screenshot. I recommend just hitting the print screen button or the snipping tool. I won't play the video, but there is an amazing video that Ancestry put out, and it will do everything that you need it to about how to do step by step. So one of the things is you'll see in the top right corner here, it says save. Well, when you do the drop down on that, it will have, you know, save as PDF, save as a JPEG, doesn't matter which format, whatever works the best for you guys. And then, so for more information, when you're working with Ancestry, you'll find that Ancestry uses resources from many different sites, and it puts them all into the same source, which is Ancestry. So it's kind of it's like Ancestry is the umbrella, and then all these little sites and resources contribute to it. The absolute favorite of mine is Find a Grave. So this is one of the examples of a research you'll find. You'll have a picture of the gravestone if they have it. And the great thing about this is most of the gravestones, especially years ago, have multiple family members listed. And this is a wealth of information because you'll get the exact birth and death dates and all the people that are related to them. And usually it's immediate family. And then I'm also telling you, which cemetery it's located at. One of the things that I think people underestimate is how you can find this. So when you go into the Find a Grave on the actual website, it will tell you who uploaded this information. It might be a person this is just their hobby. They're going around and photographing, grave sites and doing this, which God bless them. It's a great source for us. But what I have found is that if you reach out to that person and you say, I'm doing family research, this is an ancestor, I'm struggling, find out where they got that information from. So one example I have is this lovely gentleman, an officer and a gentleman sort of. So this is one of the on Find a Grave, one of the people that I found, and I said, hey, I'm doing research. How did you get all this information about him? I cannot find it anywhere. Turns out a military magazine did a 4-page spread on one of my ancestors, who is an absolute horrible human, very sad excuse for a human, but he was a great military person. So they did this, and they did all the research. And at the very last page on that magazine has every single source and citation listed. And I was able to use those to go forward. And this was a roadblock. I could not get past this person on my family tree. So do not underestimate just reaching out to people. Another few sites I recommend is Family Search. This one is free. It also has a lot of vital records, and it has more of the information throughout this PowerPoint. Another is Facing History and Ourselves. It's not so much as family research, but more on historical events that could have affected genealogy. They do mention genealogy a lot, and a lot of them are articles that you can read about and learn on more information. The Vital Records is fantastic. This is the direct link to the Massachusetts one. They're fantastic because, government resources and, government forms are very more legit than just some random one you found online that looks kind of sketchy and you're like, maybe it could be it, but it's very blurry. The Mass State Archives are also very helpful, and so is the Social Security Death Index. The Name Origins is a wonderful tool. I linked the one that is through Ancestry, and then you can find out more about your last name, and maybe it's more helpful to you. One of the great links that I like, though it's not relevant to my family, but a lot of my friends love this. It's called Black Past, and it's genealogy resources for African Americans in America, because they've had such a struggle with their history here and finding out who they are as a person from their ancestors and where they came from. It's wonderful resources. Another is the historical societies. Always check your local ones, and they have a lot of information. And also, check for churches. Go to your local library. So in Framingham, we actually have a Framingham history section in our library in the downtown location. And if your family is, multiple generations from here, chances are you'll find something there. They're absolutely fantastic. And then, as I mentioned, there's other family tree websites like Ancestry, and MyHeritage. I personally use MyHeritage, but my uncle used Ancestry. And we do that for a reason, because if you use two different websites, we both can trade information back and forth. So whatever Ancestry doesn't have and MyHeritage does, or vice versa, we kind of get the best of both worlds. Another is Google Books. Do not underestimate them. I actually found through Google Books, one of my ancestors, that through the Civil War, one of his, the people that he was in charge of, he wrote letters back and forth home. And at the end of the war, his family took all the letters that they saved and made a book out of it. And someone ended up doing more research on it. And they cited my ancestor multiple times, and it was cool to learn that he was mentioned so much, and I only found that through Google Books. So these are a list of books that we have at the Framingham Library for genealogy. They're fantastic if you prefer to learn more about it through books instead of through online. The Genealogy for the First Time and the Everything Guide to Genealogy are some of my favorites. A few of the books I included, It's All Relative and Inheritance, are more kind of memoirs. They are nonfiction, but it's fantastic to learn about how these people were not emotionally ready to do their family research. And then this is what came out of it. So our next in the genealogy series is Expanded Genealogy. It's going to be Monday, August 21st. In July, we will be posting the list of August events for you to register. So some of the things that we will be covering are immigration and citizenship. We'll be talking more about the ports used that are not just Ellis Island that used for America. We'll be finding certificates in other countries, and we'll do a special focus on women in history through women's genealogy. And then whatever you guys suggest in this survey that we sent out in the chat, we will try and add a lot of those into our expanded genealogy. Like I said, we'll have an advanced one, and that will be in October. And yes, we will cover more about DNA kits, because I know that's always the #1 thing people have with genealogy. But that's why we have it in an advanced one, because it is a lot to talk about and unpack in that.